Today I want to tell a story. It's a story that takes place long, long ago in a country far, far away. How about we call this story session? No, forget it, don't like it. How about story time? Yeah, story time. That works. This story starts in February of 2008. I was 14 years old and I was a freshman in high school going on a foreign exchange trip to Berlin, Germany.
We just came off the tram and we're going to Checkpoint Charlie at about the Berlin Wall. AC, Berlin.
So for those unfamiliar, a foreign exchange trip is pretty simple. It essentially means that I would stay with a German family in Berlin for 2 weeks with a kid that they had roughly around my age. And then a few months later, that kid would come stay with me in New York for 2 weeks. So it was a foreign exchange, it was a cultural exchange between two countries. Now I was 14 at the time, and all the other kids going, I believe there was 9 of us, were all juniors. They were all 2 or 3 years older than me. I was the youngest one, and I had never been away from my parents for that amount of time. Now I was really against the trip. I didn't want to go, it was scary, it was intimidating, I didn't want to be gone for that long, but my parents really pushed me to it and they wanted me to do this experience, they wanted me to go on this trip and live with a German family. So I reluctantly went along, despite the fact that I was the only person my age going. I didn't even know these people. These other 9 people or 8 people, I had no idea who they were. I was kind of going on my own to a foreign country, so it was a big deal. It was a really big deal.
We're going to this subway. Train's coming.
So we arrive in Germany and I meet the family and they were extremely nice. But that entire first night I cried because I felt so alone, I felt lost. I wanted my family, I didn't know anybody on the trip. It was really difficult for me to rationalize why I was there. And this is sort of the time before social media. I know we had MySpace, and I did have a MySpace, but it wasn't as connected as it is now. I think being 15 now is a little bit different because everyone has access to smartphones. That wasn't a thing back in 2007. I had just got a flip phone. That was all the rage at that time. But after the first night, I sucked it up, and I would go on to have one of the most transformative and life-changing experiences, looking back now, that I think I've ever had before.
Look, they use trams here. See how it's got like, it uses electric. It's electric. And then these are the tram thingies. They use them all around the streets. And look how cool this is, the tram. It runs with that thing right up there. A little wire that goes up right there. I'm pointing. It doesn't go this slow though.
Now, part of what made this trip so special was that I filmed almost all of it. I had filmed before, I was really into editing for a few years before that, but this is the first time I took a camera on my own and I just filmed. I didn't take any pictures, I just filmed. And I have filmed using this camera. Now, this is a Sony camcorder, and you probably haven't seen this for a very long time. This uses high 8 cassette tapes, which is really ancient technology now. Unfortunately, it doesn't work, but I had used this for so long when I used to film when I was younger. And this was the first trip where I took this camera on my own and I just filmed. So here I am, I'm 14 years old, I'm going to Germany with 9 strangers, and I'm staying with a family I've never met. And I look back on that experience now. After that first night, I look back on that experience, and it came at a time where when you're an adolescent, the experiences you have really mold you to the person you'll become. At that age, at 14, 15, those experiences, the things that you go through, will shape the way that you turn out for the most part when you get older. And I can tell you that these experiences were nothing but positive.
You just heard the TV tower that I went up the first day they took me in is the 3rd largest tower in Europe, so that's pretty cool.
Now, the way the trip was handled is that we would stay with our host family in school for 1 week, and the other week we would spend touring around the city. We visited a ton a ton of sites. We visited Checkpoint Charlie, which is the famous line between East and West Berlin.
And recently Berlin started to mark the old borderline with these other different stones in the streets and in the way
This is the borderline between East and West Berlin.
We also visited the Olympic stadiums, which housed the 1936 Summer Olympic Games. At the time, the Nazis were in power.
In 1936, the Olympics were held here.
What's really interesting about that is that the bid for the Olympic Games was figured out in 1931, so 2 years before the Nazi regime took power. But at that time in 1936, they were in power, so they were the ones that were hosting the Olympic Games.
Okay, this is where the Olympic flame was, of course.
Probably the most powerful day was the day that we visited Sachsenhausen concentration camp outside of Berlin. It was if you can picture a day that you would visit a place like that, that was the day. It was cold, it was very windy, very cloudy. And to learn about the history, it was fascinating, but it was also very scary. And I think it was really one of my first introductions to the horror of the world. But that was important to see. That was very important to see. Now, as you walk into the concentration camp, now this camp was mainly for political prisoners, and as you walk in, on the gate, it has the words Arbeit macht frei, which means work will set you free. It's really made famous. People know that phrase because it's on the top of the Auschwitz gate. And I had known what it meant. I had been very interested in that time period, so I know what those letters meant. But just seeing it in person and the mixture of the type of day it was, you got this very cold chill. Now, part of what the trip entailed was to do a presentation after the trip was over about a certain experience that you had. And I was very into video at the time, and I had taken a lot of video of the camp itself. And I did a 5-minute video about the concentration camp. And it was really the first time that I had done a full video presentation. So not only am I getting this incredibly powerful experience seeing this camp and being in this country for the first time on my own, but now I'm also instituting one of my passions, which was to make film and to do video. It was one of those experiences where at the time you don't realize how powerful and how life-changing it is. But I look back now, 8 years later, almost 9 years later, wow, 9 years. You know, I think a lot of who I am and the personality that I have was a result of that trip. And I'll always thank my parents for that. Thank you, Mom and Dad, for allowing me that experience. If there's one piece of advice I can give, it's to travel. If it's within your means, travel. It's so eye-opening to see and experience other cultures and see how other people live. You know, there's 7 billion people in this world, and each culture does it a little bit different. And that's just fascinating in itself. And at the end of the day, even if you're not on board with how other cultures do it, it will make you love the way that you live that much more.